Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. on Twitch, and 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch, and if you're looking to support me, that is, on my Patreon. Today we are doing chapter 108 of Breaking Step. Serba had built an army of dogs as they entered the road leading to the city hall. Disfigured, they still attacked because the them couldn't stop them from roaming like they hadn't been able to fully control how they fought. Stowe had set up this floor to resemble how he thought a city worked, with guards and gangs and occasional citizens. So he'd set dogs to wander around, alone or in pack. Stowe had probably gotten the idea from runners talking about the other dogs in Craggle Rock. The effect of the army was that Tibs hardly had to fight in the last battles. Serba sent the dogs to swarm the attackers nearly as soon as they stepped out of alleys. And now, as the city hall came... All right, this should not be capitalized. And now, as the city hall became visible in the distance, the attacks stopped. Them knew this was where he was heading and had control over the guards, so why hadn't it set this road as a gauntlet? As much as he wanted to think this, uh, this to as long this was still helping him. It didn't feel right. He slowed. This had the feel of a dungeon room, one bare of anything other than the boss loot at the end, inviting the greedy to rush to open it. Tibs? Serba asked. This is a trap. What did them have to work with? If they could alter the buildings or the grounds, they'd have tried to open it up or crush him with them. They hadn't used doorways to drop golems on him, but was that because they couldn't, or because they were holding back until the right moment? Should we go around? There's only one entrance. Even if we take the alleys to reach the road that goes along the building, the them can still do something. She whistled, and before Tibs could stop her, half a dozen dogs ran ahead. They vanished out of his shortened range without anything happening. Was it because, as dungeon-made creatures, they didn't trigger the traps that them set, or did they have to decide when the traps were sprung? He carefully made it in one block, sensing for anything, then another, and a third. He made out motion in the distance, well beyond his sense, just before a howl sounded. They're coming back, Serba said, smiling. All of them? Dogs aren't smart enough to tell if one of them's gone and warn me. I've trained them to howl on the way back, so I know it's them. The them could have retaken control. Or replace them with its dogs. I can't sense them yet. Not that I'd be able to know that way. Dungeon creatures all feel the same to me. Can you sense me like that? How about anyone else? Everyone has life essence in them, he answered, trying to push his sense and get earlier warning of anything. You and townsfolk are hard to tell apart in groups because it's thin and doesn't have an element to tint it, so I can't tell apart. Okay. One, let's fix this. It's not tell about, it's tell apart. So now I'm going to, and doesn't have an element to tint it. So I can identify people. She let out a series of shrill whistles not long after they'd entered. Tibs sense, and they came to a stop. I think they're still my dogs. Or the them was cunning. Either way, he had to go on. He stayed on guards as he reached them. The dogs were oddly still. The dungeon creatures didn't fidget when they waited. They were like statues until they acted. Serbo's dogs, the one that had entered with them, raced ahead and sniffed the dungeon dogs, while the others walked in step with her, waiting for instruction. Tibs? The whisperer stopped him. Ganny? He whispered back, and Serbo eyed him. Tibs, you need to be careful. They're waiting for you. How's Stowe? Holding on? They cracked Stowe's core, but nothing more. I think they want us to watch you die. What can you tell me about them? They aren't like you, or Stowe, or even me. I don't know what they are. All I've been told about them is, and those like them, is that they are sent to bring dungeons back in line or end them if they're gone too far. I thought it was the guild. I thought it's what the guild sent adventurers to do. That only happens if the guild realizes at first. I think it's dangerous for adventurers to do it too often. They might realize dungeons aren't what they think. Tibbs didn't see that happening with how set in their ways the guild was. They aren't like those creatures. They aren't essence made to be in the world. I don't know, she said in exasperation. I'm not like you or Stowe. I don't sense the elements. I just see what they do, how they act. I think they can be both. I can affect essence and what's solid, Tip says, so I can handle them. I hope so. I don't think they're I don't think they're going to be satisfied with just ending Stowe. They want Stowe to suffer for protecting the town from them. How has Stowe been protecting the town? As far as Tibbs knew, Stowe still couldn't affect that far. The rings. But that's just to help with the sickness. Tibbs, they are the sickness. I thought you knew. I thought it was why you asked Stowe to make the rings. They can't. That isn't. The secret Tibbs now knew was the them following him and its tendrils stretching to the people around. He thought it was just it spreading secrets the way people who know them did. Could he have sensed them? Why? He demanded. The sickness had started well before Tibbs had angered the them. Why would they do something like that? I think it's how they survive, she answered. Stowe does it through the essence he accumulates from the runners who die and what he finds already there. They do it by taking essence from what's around them. I'm not sure. All I can say is that each time they return from being outside, there is noticeably more of them. He'd missed it. His anger fought his attempt to breathe it down. How could he have missed that? They aren't going to win, he said through gritted teeth, and Serbo took a step back. I'm fine, he told her. You don't sound it. She made hand motions, and the dogs positioned themselves before her. He breathed. I just found out that them is what's been making people sick, and I never realized it. Were you supposed to? She raised her hand at the glare he gave her, then breathed. She was right. He hadn't known that secret was the them until recently, and he hadn't noticed if the secret was where the worst of the if that secret had been where the worst of the sickness had happened. It happened when he sensed it in town. He had acted to help Craggle Rock as soon as he understood how to help with the problem, and that was all he could have done. Tibbs headed for the building. Now he knew how to stop the sickness permanently. Stay out of reach, he told Serbo as she fell into step with him. I don't know how much the ring's going to protect you from a direct attack. How are they making the city sick? They drain life essence from people. She nodded. Just the town folks. I don't think so. Everyone's been on edge. Don said that being tired does that to people, and it's one way not having enough life essence feels. Runners have more. That's probably why I didn't fall sick, but we have been. There's a lot of irritable. I'm not staying out of the fight, she says. I have my dogs. She added before he could protest. That's why I have them. Don't worry, I won't get anywhere close to the fighting itself. He nodded and continued on. He sensed something as he made out the detail of the city hall's door. He was surprised it didn't register as a secret until he realized that they had no reason to hide here. The them was at the bottom of the steps leading to the door, and as Ganny said, there was something different about them. What he sensed came across as to him as a representation of attempting to explain the elements and essence to someone who didn't have them. There was never an exact word for any of it, so he settled for approximation that barely carried the meaning he needed them to. That approximation was what they felt like. They had essence, he could sense that much, but it was put together in a way that he couldn't even think of a word close to it. Not right was the best he could manage. There were threads and the lines and the arcanas that made up creatures of the elements. But the way they were, woven wasn't the right word, nor was etched. It was almost like the arcanas themselves were what the threads were made of. But even that was just an approximation of what he sensed. I sense you there, he called. Something happened. The whatever made the them shifted in a way Tibs again didn't quite understand. Serpa gasped, stepping back, and her dogs reacted by growling. What is that? She asked, voice trembling. Tibs looked back and realized that he could see them now, along with sensing. Not that what he saw helped figure out what they were. Sheets hung between buildings caught in the breeze was the best he could come up with. Many of them floating around something he couldn't quite make out, but had a sense of familiarity to it. You are an abomination, the them stated. Serba put a hand to her ears, and the dogs that had entered with them whined, shaking their heads. What was that? Them talking. That isn't talk, she said in dismay. That was terrible. You aren't made to understand this, the them said, hate dripping from the words. You should never been allowed to escape and spread. Escape what? Tibbs asked, then cursed his curiosity. But the question seemed to give them pause. The dungeon that made you, of course. Did you think you just came to be in the world? The tone was mocking. That you are special? Everything that is came from a dungeon and should be returned there. I don't think that's true, he replied. Purity clerics believed purity had made the world and people. Don had said they were scholars trying to prove countless stories about how the world came to be, how people came to exist, and none of what he'd read got close to proof. What do you know of truth? It said with derision. You are an aberration of things that escaped and were deemed too insignificant to be bothered with. You think yourself more than what you are, and I will not wait for the decision to be made by others. I will show you the nothing that you are. Move wasn't the right word, and in the time Tibbs struggled with finding it, the dam was before him. Then he was in the air, suffusing himself with earth and coating himself with ice and metal for armor. He crashed through walls and bounced off the ground before coming to a stop. He breathed the pain down enough he could suffuse himself with purity and decided he needed to avoid being hit like that again. How are you not dead? It demanded, and Tibbs threw himself aside as a mass of those sheets hit where he'd been. The arm within them cracked the ground. Cracked the ground. It couldn't be an arm. It was too thin, and the them had too many of them. They seemed to stand on them when he didn't move. When they didn't move. Tibbs jumped out of the way of another strike, and the cracks in the ground spread to the buildings. He couldn't let them get close. He etched his fire whip and flung it. It passed through the sheets without noticeable effect, then wrapped around the limb, appendage, whatever it was. They floated around. He had to stop wasting time looking for. Tibbs was in the air again. The dam had yanked effortlessly, and now he was heading for them. He suffused himself with air, and that thin So feels I'm saying, and that thin and dark with a pointed aid. Okay, yeah. And thing, thing with a pointed end that made Tibs shudder. An unnamed fear went through him and planted into in the ground. Then he was out its back. He couldn't tell if there was a side to them. He suffused himself with earth and bounced on the ground, turning to land on his feet. No close range, no close range, and no using etching. He kept hold of. That didn't leave him with a lot, short of. It was a good thing done wasn't here, trying new things. He started with what he had, making knives of ice and metals and throwing them, using air to get them to hit properly. The them didn't get out of the way or bother deflecting them. It did something like what made it visible, but not, and the knives passed through, It hadn't suffused itself or moved those parts that seemed hard out of the way. Other than that shift in the way its essence was arranged, nothing had changed. He kept flinging knives, but focused on what he sensed. Plural, not plural, past. It was all still there, same as before, but the sense of how real it was had changed. That was what was different. How, by the abyss, did that happen? And it happened again while a knife was within the them. Then it was flying at Tibs. Reflexively, he absorbed the essence, putting as much of his will as he could spare to fight the them's control. Only there was none. Did that mean they couldn't control essence the way runners did? Or that it hadn't bothered? Or he didn't even know enough to know what else might be in play? Did it even have a reserve? He wanted to say yes, of course it did. Everything that had essence needed to have a reserve, but this was getting to hate approximations. He altered the next knife he threw, added an edge of corruption. When it passed through the them, it hissed, and the shifting happened differently. Wrong, Tibbs wanted to say, knowing it wasn't right either. He threw more, and this time the them moved out of the way until it shifted again and didn't move. The knife went through it without a reaction. So it could adapt to his attack, but hadn't been instant. What were the limits? He etched a knife made entirely with corruption and enough of the filigree to keep it solid. It moved and caught the knife. This time the word felt right, even if all that seemed to be holding it were the sheets. He still felt the essence within the essence in the knife, so focused on changing filigree and caused it to. It was gone. He saw the knife, even sensed the essence that made it, but it was no longer his essence. It had been severed without even having to change a chance to fight for it. The them looked at him. It was the only way he could describe the malevolence he felt aimed in his direction. Then the knife was approaching much too fast. He focused on it. It was still just essence, so he could. There was something wrong with the etching. The them had done something, and the thought were hit out of his mind from the impact in his shoulder that carried him to the wall and slammed him there hard enough stars flew before his eyes. And it hurt. Abyss, that hurt. It was like when he'd walked through the room of fire or when he threw himself in the pool of corruption, but even that wasn't enough to describe just how much pain this not etching caused. He had corruption. It wasn't supposed to hurt him anymore. He thought clearly enough to suffuse himself with purity as the them approached, but it barely pushed the pain away. He grabbed at the pommel and tried to pull it out. You are nothing, the them said. The mark you bear means nothing, it snarled. I will remove you from. The rest was buried along it under the dogs. And that concludes chapter 108 of Breaking Step. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter will be up. Subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read the story as well as the other books, they are up for free on Royal Road. If you want to read ahead of what's on Royal Road and support me in the process, that is on my Patreon. And if you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. The links are in the notes, and with that, I shall wish you a good day.